remember to renew your membership, you can go to the IMPS website. We have that listed on the screen and pay through PayPal, or if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you can send a check to IMPS Box 9451, Boise, Idaho 83707. I also wanted to mention that our next presentation will be January 12th. We'll send out information as we have been through our Pahove Chapter Gmail. So hopefully all you are on that and are getting that information, and that's how you got to be with us tonight. But if someone's not, or if someone's new, someone has a question, go ahead and email at pahove.chapter@gmail.com, and I check that somewhat regularly, hopefully. Our next talk will be January 12th by John Keeley. It is titled The Nexus Between Wildflowers, Climate Change, and Population Growth.
Wildfires, not wildflowers.
Oh, wildfires, sorry. I'm trying to read notes and look at the screen at the same time. Okay, so the last announcement I have before I turn it over to Barbara to introduce Ron, and thank you, Ron, by the way, if I don't get a chance for joining us tonight and presenting, is that we're going to hold questions until the end. Ron's going to stay and answer questions. Go ahead and type them into the chat, and I'll moderate at the end. So hope everyone enjoys the presentation, and it's Barbara's go. Thanks.
So I'm delighted that Ron accepted our invitation to be a speaker. Most of us know Ron Bitner for Bitner Vineyards. I went and got myself a bottle of Muad'Hays to enjoy while listening to him chat, present to us. He's actually a bee person before he's a wine person, and he's an easy person to introduce because he'll actually be introducing, giving a lot of his background as the talk. But I'll just mention, he's a local boy from Midvale. Went to College of Idaho in the 60s. Then I got to know him because when I joined the board at the College of Orma J. Smith Museum of Natural History at the College of Idaho, where he was also active with all the insect work that he does. We actually even co-taught with a couple of the other people a pollination workshop at the Idaho Botanical Garden a few years ago. But anyhow, just I think rather than talking more about that, I'll just let Ron get started and enjoy my Bitner wine here while he's talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and everyone. I tossed in a lot of slides. I want to take you on a trip, how I got from bees to wine to biodiversity. And so I'm just going to start. If you need to get a hold of me, Ron at Bitner Vineyards after this meeting. I'd be happy to visit with you. I gave a similar talk several years ago at the C of I, Adventures of the College of Idaho Bee Biologist. This is a picture of me in Costa Rica being attacked by Africanized bees. And, so anyway, yeah, that was fun. I grew up in this little town in Midvale, 12 kids in my class, 16 high school, went off to College of Idaho because I thought it was a big school, but it was a great school. In the fall of 1967, my senior year, I took a class in entomology, and Dr. Jim Marshall asked me what I was going to do after I graduated. I was married and had a little girl, and I said, I'm not really sure. And he said, I think you should become an entomologist. I think you would make a good one. And I said, okay. He said, here's a list of schools. I want you to apply to them and see what happens. So I wrote to all of them, and a couple of months later, he met me in the hall outside of his door. And he said, how's it going? I said, hey, okay, I got it. I was accepted by all of them. There was 6 of them, I believe. And he said, where are you going to go? And who'd you get accepted to again? I said, well, I got accepted at Purdue and Ohio State and Cornell and Davis, Oregon State and University of Idaho. Which one did you choose? And I said, the University of Idaho. And he took me into his office and closed the door, and he said, "Ron, pick another school." And he said, "There's nothing wrong with the University of Idaho, but you've got to get out of this state." I'd never been out of Idaho except crossing over into Ontario occasionally. So I said, fine. And I chose Purdue. And I never got the chance to ever tell him because he passed away at an early age. I chose Purdue because I won the Rose Bowl that year. That's all I knew about Purdue. My folks thought I was going back east somewhere to school. And so packed up my wife and little girl and headed off to Lafayette, Indiana. I went there on a research grant to study the population structure of coexisting species of wasp and bees. My advisor there was another wonderful mentor, Dr. Leland Chandler, who got me into what's called trap nesting. These are for cavity inhabiting wasp bees, and how do they compete for this lack of nesting sites in nature? And so that was my master's thesis, and I loved the work I was doing there. I loved Purdue. I went back, gosh, 6 or 7 years ago. I got a distinguished entomology award from Dr. Osmond, another one of my mentors there at Purdue, and for my work with bees. But I missed my mountains, and I met George Bohart, who was leader of the USDA Bee Lab in Logan at a national meeting, and he said, "Ron, come to Logan, and I've got a project for you there." And again, I was working with trap nesting.
Ron, excuse me. Someone is asking if you would speak a little closer to your mic. They're having difficulty hearing you. Thank you.
How's this? Is that better? Better? So in the trap nesting world, we put out different sizes of grooved boards or polystyrene materials and see what nests in them and what do they feed for the protein. So I left Purdue and I went to Utah State and worked out of the Logan Bee Lab. And my Ph.D. thesis was on ecological management of the alfalfa leaf cutting bee. This was a little bee that had just been discovered in the mid-60s in the Boise Valley here. But it was a very efficient pollinator of alfalfa seed. And it helped Idaho become one of the #1 producers of alfalfa seed. In the alfalfa seed, the flower is difficult to trip and gather pollen. Honeybees learn to avoid that and just steal nectar, but this little bee gets right down and pollinates, grabs the pollen for its protein source, heads back to its nest, cuts pieces of leaves to line its nest. So from about mid-'80s, clear up into 2006, I worked for Pioneer Hybrid International, managing large populations of these bees all over the Northwest, Canada, and California. And I was adding up the other day, I probably dealt with about 10 million leafcutter bees over that period of time. It's a little bee that we hatch out into the fields, and in May, early June, and within 3 weeks, it'll set 1,000 pounds of seed, whereas a honeybee may take 3 months to set 200 or 300 pounds of seed. So this little bee took me all over the world, and it's on my cork bottle right now, but that was my PhD work. I work with what I call the managed bees. A managed bee is a bee that a farmer can order and use. And honeybee, farmers can order them up from a honeybee keeper. Leafcutter bees, they can buy the bees from producers out of Canada. Alkali bees, I've made alkali bee beds where we brought down cores of dirt from Touchy, Washington, and planted them here and let the alkali bees take off and inhabit our soils. Part of my master's thesis, one of the bees that was most common in my boards there was the little blue orchard bee. And so I've worked in almond pollination in California with some researchers there, seeing how effective this little bee could be in almonds. Bumblebees, there are a couple of species that are available from 2 companies, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, where you can order a box of a queen and worker bees that are all ready to go early in the spring. They're used quite often in greenhouses because bumblebees are very effective pollinators of tomatoes and cucumbers. I tried them out in the open field on alfalfa seed and some onion seed crops. They tended to come out, hatch, and just fly away, so they weren't very effective. But I used those for quite a bit in my experiments. I spent 10 years from 1995 to 2005 in Australia. Pioneer sent me down there because they wanted the alfalfa leafcutter bee in Australia. And so I had a contract with CSIRO in Australia to evaluate all the quarantine risk of bringing an insect into Australia. And with all the problems they had, I was surprised they even invited me down to bring this little bee to Australia. But in Australia, they call it lucerne, not alfalfa, but their production was very low. And the only pollinator they had was the honeybee. And honeybees took 2 to 3 months to set 300 pounds of seed. In Australia, it was a matter of lack of water. They needed a bee, the leafcutter bee, to act as a tool to pollinate and do 1,000 pounds of seed in a matter of weeks. And so I started on a 10-year journey to write all the protocols to introduce that bee into Australia. Again, I went back to my master's work with trap nesting bees. The first several years, 4 or 5 years, I spent just looking at what types of bees I might find in Australia, native bees or wasps, that might be interfered with by introducing the alfalfa leaf cutting bee. And most of my alfalfa seed production is pretty isolated. So I didn't find a lot of other bees. I found a lot of wasps that got into my nest. But I did that for several years just to show that I wouldn't be bringing in a competitor for any of the natives. Developed a whole quarantine protocol with the people there and working with Dr. Dennis Anderson out of CSIRO. Dennis was a honeybee specialist, but I shared my lab with his there. And the last 3 years of the project, we brought in about 100,000 cells each year from Canada down into Australia. So I was going from northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere and had to figure out how to break the diapause in a short period of time to get these bees to hatch. And we developed in the quarantine facility there, incubation rooms that would incubate the bees out into adults. And before I could release any of those adults, I had 6 technicians that sorted every bee of that 100,000 bees that would hatch out, because I could not go to the field with any parasites, any diseases, any other species of bees. So I did that for 10 years, or 3 years were my introductions there. My releases were on 6 sites around southern Australia in some of the seed producing areas. So we'd hatch out the bees, putting them in these plastic containers, sort through them, put them in a cold storage, and I'd head off to my release sites, or anywhere from, it was kilometers in, but it was anywhere from 50 miles to 200 miles away. I would do my releases and come back to start the next day, because it took about 3 weeks to hatch that many bees out.
Get it.
For that work down there, not only from Pioneer, but from CSIRO, I got several awards just because it was the first time they ever introduced an insect into Australia that went from one cycle to the next. In the same quarantine facility, they were bringing in dung beetles, but they had to bring them in as eggs, hatch them out, and lay eggs again before they could even take those to the field. But they allowed us, because of all the procedures we went through, to actually introduce adults into the field in the first season. So I've been playing with bees ever since 1968. But like I said, I grew up in a little town of Midvale, but my cousins grew up in Sunny Slope, Idaho. And I came back, had gone to work at Pioneer Hybrid in Nampa, Idaho. But I had always loved the Sunny Slope area where my cousins lived. And I found some property there in 1979, I believe. I can't really remember the dates anymore, but the Idaho wine industry was just starting then. And I found a little spot that overlooked the Snake River here, and began planting my 15 acres of wine grapes. So pretty hard to take some days. This is my little vineyard, the small block. There's a bigger block of grapes there that belongs to the Sims family. And I knew nothing about wine or wine grapes, but I enjoyed growing the grapes. When I was in Australia in 1995, I got a phone call from Greg Koenig, who was just starting a winery there, and he wanted to buy some grapes from me. And over the years, even that first year when I came home and met with him, I said, well, I'll sell you grapes, but I want you to make small lots of wines for me. And he's been my winemaker since for almost 25 years now, and made some nice wines for us. I pretty much stick to growing the grapes and playing with the bugs and the bees around my vineyards here. What makes Idaho unique that I've found out over the years are our soils. We're part of the old Lake Idaho seabed. Our south-facing slopes, the Snake River below us here, have all contributed to a unique spot here in Idaho. And like I said, I didn't know a lot about wine grapes or wine over the years, but I've been on several national boards. I was chair of the Wine Grape Growers of America at one time several years ago. And I found our spot is as great a spot as anywhere in North America to grow wine grapes. We grow some really nice reds and whites here. And it's all based on our geology and geography. We're a high desert. My vineyards are 2,650 feet in elevation. And that's pretty high in elevation to grow wine grapes. There are places that are a few higher, but we have a very short growing season here. And so we've had to learn how to deal with hot and cold and certain pests, but it's been a great spot. My vineyards this next year are 40 years old. And I can't believe that I just finished my last harvest here with some late harvest Riesling last week. But it's been a fun venture, bees and wine. From 1976 to 1980, I worked for the University of Idaho as their first integrated pest management specialist, focusing on alfalfa for seed, developing a scouting program to help farmers stop spraying the alfalfa seed so much, because when they were spraying the seed, they were killing their little leafcutter bees all the time. And those bees cost them $200 or $300 an acre. And so I've always had that background in biocontrol and working with beneficial insects. 2012, I went for a live certification. This is a third-party certification. It stands for Low Input in Viticulture and Enology, where I really look at whether I want to spray or not. Do I have enough beneficial insects in the vineyards or not? And every 3 years, I keep a lot of records, but I've been certified now for over 8 years. And you'll see this on the back of my bottle. I'm the only vineyard in Idaho that's certified live, because there is a lot of paperwork involved. And for a lot of growers, they've had to learn to identify all the pests and the parasites, but that came natural for me. But along the way, I decided to also integrate my love of bees into the vineyards and treat my little, just below my house, I've got a 4-acre block. And I treat that almost like my research blocks that I had when I was with the University of Idaho. And so anything that comes along adds to biodiversity that's unique, that helps me not spray or put poisons down. I haven't had Roundup on my block in the whole 8 years. That's part of my certification. And so to keep the weeds down, sometimes I let the weeds let them go as long as they're not causing problems and they're not a weedy plant. A lot of the weeds have flowers on them, so I let them go. I don't disc. We mow a lot, but on my 4 acres, I've got 2 guys that use the weed whackers to go through it twice a year. And that's how I control the weeds. This past year, we put in raptor posts. There's a gentleman in Eagle now, and he approached me to help him get started putting out barn owl boxes and raptor posts. And I didn't know a lot about barn owls, and he just moved up from California where he had a business, and he wanted to get to know the locals. And I said, well, I'll help you. I want to learn about barn owls. When he told me that barn owls, they may have 2 clutches a year, but each clutch of 3 to 4 barn owls require between 3,000 and 4,000 rodents to feed all of those babies. We just had the sheep move through. We've still got friends from Cambridge, Idaho that run their sheep down here. And so our fall weeding consists of running the sheep through the vineyards. I have a lot of quail. I put out protective grasses and leftover cuttings from my vineyards just to protect all of the quail that I have out here. And again, typically we do a lot of gopher trapping, and I'm hoping these barn owls will take off starting this next year. I want to talk a little bit about the different kinds of bees. You know, a lot of crops, we're really looking at pollinator reservoirs where we can build up initially for just beneficial insects that will build up in those. But I've wanted to build up my pollinator reservoirs based on how they can help my bees throughout the season. And in the world, there are about 20,000 species identified of bees. The United States has about 4,000 species of bees, 1 species of honeybee. I gave a talk in California last week, and California has over 1,600 identified, but that's because they have a lot of taxonomists there at Davis and Berkeley who've captured them and identified them. In the Northwest, we're just getting started with the taxonomy of these, and with there are not a lot of big museums here that focus on native bees. But there's 400 to 500 native bees that have been identified in the Northwest. 70% of all those bees nest in the ground. So that's one thing that in working with farmers and letting them understand they need to leave bare areas for these bees to nest where they're not irrigating over them, where they're not disking through them, because they're almost like free pollination for them. One of the bees I worked with, I talked about earlier, was the Alkali Bee. It's a ground nesting bee that will burrow into the soil. Typically they're in salt flats. There's a salt layer above the soil that keeps the moisture in the ground. And these are very strong flyers, and they used them a lot in the Homedale area in the 60s and 70s, but they tend to fly off to fields that might be 5 or 6 miles away. They're strong flyers and wouldn't stay just with the alfalfa seed field. And so when the leafcutter bee came along in the mid-60s, farmers switched mostly to the leafcutter bee. Just around my place here are some ground nesters that I have. Here's this little desert globe mallow. Typically starts to bloom around my place around Mother's Day weekend. About that same weekend, every year within 2 or 3 days, this little diadasia bee, genus Diadasia, hatches. It's one of the few flowers it goes to. And it flies for about a month. And over here to the right are these little turrets where they dig holes in the ground and lay their eggs. But, you know, it's so timed to Mother's Day every year within, you know, I've had these for 8 or 9 years. They're always there every year. Some years there's more, some years there's less. When we have real rainy weather, it's been hard on the bees to make their nests. Got some bumblebees that can be ground nesting. They don't dig holes, but they'll often find a mouse nest in a hole. Here is a wasp. Now, in the wasp, the difference between wasp and bees for the protein source is bees need pollen for the protein source. Wasps gather animal matter, meaning caterpillars, grasshoppers. This wasp actually gets underground beetle grubs, some of the kinds that you can get into our vines. So it's beneficial in that way. So wasps and bees, flies are all beneficial insects to me in my fields there. There's a little perdita. This is a very tiny little bee that looks like an ant when it's crawling around. My specialty have been the cavity nesting bees like the leaf cutting bee, where there has to be a pre-existing hole for them. And farmers can buy these bees from Canada by the of thousands, and they hatch them out each year, release them into their shelters. You may see these shelters when you're driving around the valley. They're big blue and brown shelters that are full of nests with the leafcutter bees nesting in them. Another big difference between the different families of bees is in where they collect the pollen. Most of the bees do it on their hind legs. With the honeybee, they actually have a part of their leg is expanded into a curriculum that they make a pollen ball. A lot of the other bees just have the hairs that they have to collect the bees. My family of bees, the megachilid, collect the pollen on their stomachs, on the scopa. So we have 6 major families in North America, and 4 of them are the main ones that we will find. This poster is from the Pollinator Partnership that I'm involved with. 2 years ago, I was actually invited to go on the board of the Pollinator Partnership. It's the largest 501c3 promoting health of pollinators throughout North America, and we've just signed on with a group in Australia to start working with them and protecting pollinators. And this is a poster they did, but it just shows a diversity of bees, from this tiny little perdita to large carpenter bees to large bumblebees. And a lot of people don't even realize that we have this many kinds of bees. People always ask me, well, do you gather honey? I said, I don't. My bees gather a little bit of nectar and pollen, and there's no queens involved, except the honeybee has a queen, and bumblebees, there's an overwintering queen. Family Andrenidae, the mining bees. Very large, diverse family. They're tiny to medium in size, but all of these are ground nesters. The family Calletidae, it's a small family of bees. They're unique, and because the holes are in the ground, and sometimes moisture can cause a lot of mildew and mold issues, they actually line the cell with like a cellophane material, the nests. And these are not real common. They were more common in Australia when I was working down there. Family Helicode are the sweat bees. They're small to large. They got the name sweat bees because when you're out working in the field and they're very sweaty, a lot of times a little bee will land on your wrist, not to sting you, but they absorb the sweat on your hand and lap it up. This is a very large alkali bee bed out near Homedale, Idaho, from the 70s, where it was just a cloud of these bees nesting in the ground. Family Helicode, one of my favorites. It's another ground nesting bee, the genera and species, but they're very colorful. Many of them have different metallic colors to them. They're very striking. The family Megachilidae, the bees that collect the pollen on the stomach, are the leafcutter bees, the ones I work with, but some of the different genera make it plugs from mud, or the Carter bees makes it from hairs off of leaves to line their cells with. But this little bee, the Megachilidae, the alfalfa leaf cutting bee, is what I did my PhD work on, and the blue orchard bee is what I did my master's thesis on. And so I've been playing with these 2 bees a lot for the last 40 years. Again, the little leafcutter bee will land on the flower and pry the petals apart to get down to the nectaries. And in doing so, they get whopped in the head with the pistol. And it's striking the way they're hit, but they sort of shake it off. A honeybee will learn to avoid that and just go beside the flower and steal a nectar without gathering pollen, which they're not a very effective pollinator that way. Family Apidae, another large family of bees, and it includes the honeybee. The honeybee is definitely the queen of the pollinators, but it's having its issues in the last 15 years. There used to be about 7 million colonies of them after World War II. We're down to about 2 million, 2.5 million colonies. And when you hear a lot about issues with honeybees, there's a disorder called a colony collapse, and a lot of things going on there. With the colony collapse, there's some diseases involved. There's lack of diversity of flowers. They do better when there's a lot of different kinds of flowers. There's mite issues, there's diseases. So even though I've been working with the managed non-apis bees for the last 40 years, it's only been in the 15 last years when people started realizing the honeybee was struggling. And a third of everything we eat starts with bees, and farmers were used to just ordering up honeybees. So there's a lot of research that's been going on the last 15 years, a lot of new young bee researchers that are working with all the other kinds of bees to decide or learn about them, because these bees are there naturally. And if a farmer can find them and work with them, he's got free pollination out there. Melisodes are the little sunflower bees that come out in the fall. Xylocopa, we don't have a lot of Xylocopa here. They're more southern, huge bees. They're back on the East Coast a lot. I'm sure that, Barbara, you probably saw these on the East Coast. They're huge, but they're the Carpenter Bee. And when we talk about diversity or you know, what it means in your vineyard, I don't just promote, let's do flowers and sites for nesting for pollinators, but also for wasps, because they are out there looking for spiders and caterpillars and grasshoppers. And anytime there's a queen involved, like with the hornets and the paper wasps, they're very defensive, and so you have to be careful around them, but I still let most of them go. One of my favorite pictures of this little mud dauber that had a nest full of black widow spiders. So 2 publications I want you to think about, and they should be on your shelves, because one of the things I want to visit with you about tonight is, you know, I've been a bee biologist all these years, and I plant flowers, and unless Barbara comes out and identifies them for me, I haven't kept track of what they are. And then I notice when she's out camping along the trails in Boise, she takes beautiful pictures of bees on the flowers. And I say, why don't you collect that for me? Well, I don't collect bees. So we need to get together and figure out how to be collecting bees off of a lot of these native plants and get them identified. And because there is so little knowledge of a lot of the bees in the Northwest. And, but these 2 books are excellent books. And we had Joe Wilson at the C of I last year give a talk, but you have to notice California Bees and Blooms. 2 of these people were friends of mine that I've known for a long time, Gordon Franke and Robin Thorpe. But when I looked at the book, and it was before I knew Barbara, here was Barbara Erder over there. And she ended up on the museum with us. So that's a must read too. So you can find those on Amazon. They're less than $25, or we have them both at the museum when it's open. I gave this talk last week to some vineyard growers in Napa Valley of California, and you know, they've just been ravaged by fires this year. And I had to stick these slides in to show them another advantage of having pollinator strips around your vineyard, even though their fires were huge. 2 years ago, a neighbor hired somebody to try and control the weeds in this bare lot between us. I was always complaining about the weeds. Well, nobody was watching this kid, and he thought the fastest way to do it was just light a match and toss it out there. And the wind was blowing hard that day, and within less than 30 minutes, the fire had spread over into the Sims block. It ended up burning down about an acre and a half of reverse demeanor grapes here. And there's a spray rig down here. They put water in it, trying to control the fire there. My daughter was here. I was in Boise at a meeting. And she called me and said, Dad, I don't know what to do. The fire's coming towards our house. The wind's blowing. And I said, well, just get away from it. Don't, you know, fires can be dangerous. And she said, no. And I said, well, Everardo, I'll call him. He'll come and tell him what to do. I said, Everardo, get over there and turn the sprinklers on our vineyard, and turn, especially around my pollinator strips that go clear around my house and down this block here. And so we turned all the sprinklers on, and the fire stopped right along the edge of our pollinator strips here. And on both sides, this is Phacelia along the bottom here, and it burned right up to them. So one other use that most people don't think about is that this diversity of these pollinator reservoirs that you can put around your place can make great fire breaks. Bee-friendly farming. When I joined, went on the board of Pollinator Partnership It's my second year on the board. I'm really enjoying this board, and I'm the only bee biologist on there, but they were starting a program called Bee-Friendly Farming a few years ago, and it wasn't going very far. They didn't know how really to communicate with farmers, and I said, well, I've been doing that for 40 years. So I came on the board, and we've really done some amazing things this year with the Bee-Friendly Farming program. And in June, we hired a master's student from Davis, Miles Dakin, and put him in charge as the Bee-Friendly Farming coordinator. And I'm kind of Miles's mentor in this, but Miles is another one of these bright young graduate students is out and knows how to do PowerPoints and Zooms and everything else. But anyway, I borrowed some of Miles's slides that he put together for our Bee-Friendly Farming program through the Pollinator Partnership. And Bee-Friendly Farming is a certification program from the Pollinator Partnership, working with farmers to help protect, preserve, and promote pollinator health. And this last year, in 2 years, we've gone from 1,000 acres to 50,000 acres. And a lot of that's because Miles had a lot of research that he was doing with a navel worm that got into the almond groves there in California. But in working with those farmers, a lot of them really saw the benefit, big time, of building up their beneficial insects and putting out pollinator gardens in their vineyards, and then mowing these down and building up their soils. And so a lot of our acres this year are from some very big almond farms. And we're just now looking, the USDA Bee Lab in Logan is working with Osmia lignaria as pollinators in the almond orchards down there. So to be a certified bee-friendly farmer, you're a farmer. But we have a lot of people who want to be individual sponsors, businesses, but aren't apiarists. Honeybee guys don't necessarily have farms, so they can become partners. And we're working on one just for the bee-friendly farming gardener, that for people who want to see what we're doing, how they can get more information. We put out a lot of information on seeds to use, how to take care of the bees, what kind of nest you can get. So I'm out really promoting the bee-friendly farming program we've got going here. If you go to pollinator.org, you can find this site very easily, and I'm hoping a lot of you take a look at that after tonight. The main thing for bees, it can be permanent or temporary, but for a farmer, he has to have 3% of his ground set aside where he's not spraying, and he's really taking care of the flowers for the pollinators. On my live certification, I have to have 10% of my ground set aside for beneficial insects and pollinators. So the more, the better. And the main thing about the flowers is you need different flowering plants, as you all know. There are different times of the season they flower. There are different pollinators that are attracted to those throughout the season. So we encourage understanding and planting plants that will bloom throughout the season. We put out a lot of newsletters, good source of information for anybody interested in bees. And it's time to start being interested in bees. So visit beefriendlyfarming.org. You can email Miles at pollinator.org or me at ron@bitnervineyards.com. But I want us to get involved. Last spring, in the past, I've worked on several specialty crop grants. These are through the USDA, through the Department of Agriculture throughout the country. And these are different research grants you can get to help promote anything doing with specialty crops. Now, specialty crops, Idaho is full of them. They're all the seed crops we grow, the fruit crops. It's not the big things that people are used to, like soybeans and wheat. And, I mean, potatoes are even considered a specialty crop. But what I wanted to do is get a better understanding of the bees we actually have in the valley here. I've spent a lot of time with 2 or 3 species that I manage. But over the years, I've seen a lot of different bees, even in my little pollinator blocks. At any one time in the summer, I'll have 10 or 15 different kinds of bees in there. And so I decided to work with the College of Idaho and the museum there, working with the grant Tina Wilson, to write a grant starting, we had to have it in last May, to collect and identify the pollinators that specialty crops use in Idaho. The objective is to collect and identify native and managed pollinators contributing to production of specialty crops, and in order to determine best practices to support habitat and nutritional needs of those pollinators. Our second objective was to disseminate collated information and knowledge about science-based tools and best practices to growers through workshops, seminars, online portals, print media, and to have outreach through educational programs, bee-friendly certification, and pesticide certifications. And we wanted to have a place to store our species of bees that we're going to be collecting. And the natural place was the Orman J. Smith Museum of Natural History, where Dr. Craig Baird of the University of Idaho have a smaller native bee collection there, but we wanted to build that up. And I've also wanted to really, after 40 years of this, start working more with the master naturalists, the citizen scientists, because there's just getting to be a dearth of taxonomists in the bee world, like a lot of the other biological sciences. And there's just a lot of new software and apps coming along where we're working on some big programs to identify bees, what flowers they're on, and gather them up. But I want to have a place there in the museum, not only that farmers would come in and look and see what we're collecting out there, but it's can expose a lot of other people to come in. And the museum is great because we have a lot of schools, not this year, but they bring students through there, and we want to do things for as an educational outreach. So that's what this grant was about. In October, we found out we were awarded one of the top, I think there was 40 some from Idaho, as I recall, that applied for this money. But we received a grant of $87,000 to start this project. And really excited about that. We're just now getting ready to go on it. But it's given me money to buy cabinets, all the collecting material we need to hire 9 students over the next 2 to 2.5 years. It's allowed me to bring in taxonomists out of the Bee Lab in Logan and one here locally to focus on at least identifying all these bees we're collecting to genus and species if we can. And so it's a real opportunity for us to do that. And I want to start working and having people, well, there's other money there. I'm bringing in some of the best people in the country who are working with bees and pollinator gardens to come in and give lectures. They're in the biology building, or we may hold them someplace else, and they'll be open to everybody. But we're going to have 2 of those authors from the books I showed earlier, from the Bees in Your Backyard. I've got people from the USDA Bee Lab in Logan. I've got Dr. Anthony Milanthopoulos from Oregon State coming over talking about their bee atlas. In Oregon, they are collecting bees in every county in Oregon, and they have one of the largest collections in the country, and it's all based on citizen scientists there in Oregon. So I'm having access with money to bring in top people, to educate people, to collect the bees, and do what we need to do to put us on the map there at the museum, but also we live in one of the most diverse ag communities in the country. And I know this because I've traveled. I worked in Central California for years, but we have up to 100 different crops we grow in this end of the valley. And a lot of those crops require pollinators, over half of them, and yet nobody knows anything about the different pollinators. They know about leafcutter bees, honeybees, and blue orchard bees, but none of these others. And so I'm 74, so this is my next few years of work with, especially with Barbara and people like you, to really connect this world of bees and flora and have a lasting impact here on this end of the valley. Haven't talked about my wines. I'm sitting here, a glass of Cabernet. Sorry, guys, some of you aren't. I don't know, but I've always wanted. This is my main label. That's my old vine Chardonnay there. But in my life, my career, I have what I call my worker bees, and this year was more appropriate than ever. So I started a label called the Worker Bee Collection, and I don't know how many. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Edible Idaho. But Felicia Weston does a lot of that artwork, watercolors on the labels you see or in the back. And when I saw her work of the honeybee on the fall issue, I said, I need that for my label. So we have her consigned to do some labels for us that represent my worker bees, which are the fuzzy ones that I've been working with for 40 years. But the other essential workers that I have, and it's dedicated to my field workers. And she's come out, and these people here are Hortensia and Everardo and his brother Pedro have worked with me for the last 15 years. The gentleman had worked with me for 30 years, passed away 2 years ago. But these are our essential workers that, people just don't understand how important they are to putting food on the table. And my wife and I, or Bitner Vineyards, does actually have a scholarship at the College of Idaho called Taste of the Harvest that we contribute to support kids of Hispanic workers or just Hispanics in general to get a good education. But that's our way of giving back. But we'll have a series of these labels coming out. We have a dry rosé this year with the honeybee on it. Next year, I'm working on a different bee with Felicia, and then we'll have different pictures of our field workers that we like to honor. Last picture, that's my 6-year-old grandson I'm raising right now. Loves bees. I like to say you're never too young to start. There's probably 30,000 little leafcutter bees flying around him right now, but he loves bees. And that's why I really have a soft spot for education at the kindergarten through junior high level with these kids, because when I talk to farmers, as an extension specialist, I go out to the field and explain to them what I wanted. And now when I go out, it's their sons that are out there, or sometimes it's their daughters farming. They want everything on an app on their phone. But the easiest ones to talk to are their kids or their grandkids now, but the ones that get the most excited about playing with bees. So that's my talk. I'm going to end it there. Answer any questions. Stay as late as you want. So thank you for having me tonight. And you'll be hearing from me more and Barbara as we get our project and get funding started this spring, and reaching out to Pahove Chapter and Master Naturalist, and getting more just amateurs out in the field collecting native bees. And when you run across these rare flowers, I'm sure there's a rare bee that's collecting pollen on it. So we need to get that bee identified. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron, for giving such a well-rounded talk, and I appreciate getting to know you a little bit more. We had that connection with both going to College of Idaho, although at different times, and both growing up in small town Idaho, but I really appreciated the background section of your talk and all the work that you had done, in particular on the leafcutter bee. And I myself have what I think might be several different kinds of bees in my yard, but I don't know enough about them. And so I'm looking to get one of these books about the bees in your backyard. I have bumblebees. I have about 100 different species of native plants, but now I need to figure out the pollinators and what I have there. But I have ground nesting bees. I have this whole section where there's just, probably 2 to 3 dozen holes I can see in the ground where the bees are in 2 different sections of my yard, and I find it fascinating, and my kids love it, and we watch the bees go in and out of them. I watch wasps drag caterpillars down in them, and it's just incredible. So I just really enjoy it.
That's the connection I want to make with you and others who have that, even the backyard garden, especially you guys, where you put so many natives in, is we need to do a whole section on how I want you to catch the bees. But like my grandson, I send him out with the Ziploc sandwich bags. He just puts it over the flower and the bee flies up and he'll put the flower with it. And he writes his name, Ethan, on there, the date he collected it. And it's at Bitner Vineyards. And one of the taxonomists at the museum said, well, you've got a lot of flowers here. You just put Ethan on them. And I said, well, that's my grandson. Whose name should we use? And I said, well, it needs to be his name on the pin because then he'll be there in posterity with his Ethan. But I think it's going to be a simple way for us. There's different kinds of traps. We'll have a whole, we can do another Zoom on collecting methods. Simplest thing for the amateur is to just collect them in Ziploc bags, throw them in the freezer and get them to us at the College of Idaho once we get up, because I'm going to have students there pinning the pollinators, bees or whatever you have, wasps. And then I've got taxonomists that I'm paying to either send them to them or they're going to come up and do workshops on identifying these bees.
When again do you think that will be starting up? Because I also work for Fish and Game, and we have a volunteer, and he's a master's student. He's studied entomology, and he's looking for somewhere to work. And so I'm thinking, well, he might be interested in applying for those positions.
Yeah, well, these are student positions there, but again, for volunteers. These are undergraduate level, but I'm picking out 10 to 12 different specialty crops. It's a specialty crop grant, so I had to go after crops. I couldn't even consider alfalfa for seed, but my crops are going to be arugula seed, onion seed, carrot seed, some of the tree fruits. And so we're going to be trapping around a lot of those and netting around to see what bees are in close proximity to those fields in the valley. But then I want to go up into the foothills and see what we collect up there and see what's going on there. We haven't got the funding. I'm still working it out with the college. And then we can't get into the museum until the spring sometimes. But I'd like to be able to have everything in place and reach out to people by the first native bees, those ground nesting bees, we will see the end of April, 1st of May. So I'd like to have something going by then where we start collecting. So with the COVID thing, we're working through this, working with students. And so we're a little bit behind. It's a 2-year grant, but I'm asking for an extension of another 6 to 8 months or even a 3rd year because we're starting so late on it.